We're so excited to host another session of Africa Forward. We have our two chairs here today. Greetings to everybody across the continent and who are in. This is a very unique session. This is a very critical session, and we're very excited to be hosting in time, a very timely session ahead of COP. Many of you will be physically and virtually connected in a few days and weeks, and we want to really raise the discussion on how this affects Africa. And so today it's a very interesting panel. We're excited, we're thrilled, and we're honored that we have a great panel, people who are thought leaders in the right field, people who are specialists that would really share some solutions and we can all learn from. But before we begin, I just want to highlight quickly Africa Forward. And this is a platform, a virtual platform that holds, and then really the ethos is that we want to push Africa forward. And we have some strategic shifts that are compromised on 5 pillars, and really to push forward the narrative about changing African stories, profiling some of these discussions. The second is ecosystem development. We're really looking at how we can work on collaboration and initiatives together. The third one, which is a very critical, funding and how we can refocus some of that towards Africa. The fourth one is job creation and career counseling. And lastly, we would like to talk about training and capacity. And this is really what Africa Forward is centered around. Every month we host sessions to discuss, to deliberate, to inspire, and that's why we're here today. So to kick off, we have a great moderator, a very timely person who's a knowledge expert who speaks a lot. He's the co-founder of International Climate Change. His name is Olumide Idowu. He's actually based out of Lagos, Nigeria, and he's on his way to COP. So I love that that he's here to share a little bit about what the discussions are going to be held, and what a better person to facilitate today's session. So thank you very much. Over to you, Olumide.
Yeah, thank you very much, Wando. Thank you so much for giving me this platform to actually moderate this conversation today. Once again, my name is Olumide Idowu, and I'm the co-founder of International Climate Change Development Initiative. And let me quickly say that it has also been an honor for me to be moderating with a great mentor, a great, dynamic people on this platform. And it's also a great honor for me to be part of the moderator for the Catalyst 2030 conversation for this month. And how is also leading to COP27, because that is one of the biggest conversation now. But the most interesting conversation is the investment we are talking about in the context of Africa, in the context of what COP27 need to get to us, and the kind of priority that we are looking at, looking forward to do. And also, most importantly, looking at the climate resilience Africa. What are the things that we need to be looking at? What are the measures we're putting out there? How is Africa going to look like in maximizing the potential and the opportunities that lies within the NDC, within all this, mechanism that we have for Africa as a continent. And I want to also say that thanks to everybody that is joining us across the world. If you're joining us from Africa, fine, but if you're joining us from across the world, welcome to listen to the potential conversation from all over, the expert from Africa that will be speaking to us. And I can tell you that the short time they will be talking, the short time they will be presenting, there's no how you will not gain something out of this conversation. And, African Forward is an initiative, like my sister just said, is an initiative of Catalyst 2030, that African Charter that seek to rewrite the narrative about Africa through the focus on critical pillars. Rewriting the narrative of Africa is just the way forward. It helps us to understand where we are going to, and what is the future lies for both the older generation, the younger generation, and everybody that call himself a stakeholders. And my sister has also been able to share the 5 narrative pillar, shift pillar they are looking at, and how they're actually working to make sure that Africa, in the context of Africa, we get the future that we want to see and the future we want to see for the young people. So to, put the conversation straight, and for some people that are actually moving to do some other thing, let me quickly introduce, we're going to be having 3 speakers for this wonderful conversation today. We're going to be having Dr. Richard Munang, and we're going to be having Dr. Phillips Osano, and a good friend of mine as well, Dr. Krishna. I call you doctor now, So I'm going to be having these 3, great minds to be speaking to us on this conversation we are looking at today. But let me first of all bring up the Dr. Philip, because Dr. Philip will be, I don't know, yeah, Dr. Philip said he's going to be jumping on the flight very soon. But before Dr. Philip join us, Dr. Philip is a center director for the SIE Africa, and his interest is in environmental policy, development, and international affairs. And it's also very honored for me to have been able to meet him at the African Climate, I think, yeah, African Climate Week, and to also see the powerful, great work the SIE is doing. And Mr. Philip also has 15 years of experience in applied research, project coordination, policy analysis, and teaching. And so, guys, we have combination of teacher, combination of researcher, combination of project management. So a lot of information we are going to be getting concerning this conversation we're going to be having today is to think about those 5 narratives that's shown us today, at the pillar narrative that told us, and the issue that we're going to be speaking towards in COP27, and how we want to change the narrative for us as an African. To go straight to the conversation, I would like Dr. Philip to come and give us that wonderful contribution now. And also, I wish everybody to listen, and please jot down some key information, key outcome that can help us to drive what we want to see in Africa in the next coming years. Thank you so much. Dr. Philip, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Lumide. Can you hear me well?
Very clear.
Okay, great. It's actually a privilege to be able to join this conversation, and thanks to Brown Chief for coming the invitation. I'm also honored, of course, to share my thoughts alongside my colleague.
Dr. Philip,
yeah.
Dr. Philip, sorry, I think maybe you can put your earpiece mic closer to your mouth so that we'll be able to hear your voice very well.
Sorry about that. Is it different now?
Yes, it's okay now. Maybe you should talk a little bit higher. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Now, just saying also together with Karishna and Pamunan, it's good for me to join and share my thoughts on this topic. I just wanted to start from the 5 pillars that were mentioned earlier. The first one, which is to have a narrative shift in the conversation on Africa. If you recall very well, the COP27 is the 4th COP that we're going to have in the African continent. And I think as we go along, we are seeing Africa contributing to a bigger shift in terms of the conversation and solution of climate change. We see that in Marrakesh, and I think in the Sharm el-Sheikh will probably be a good opportunity for us again. I wanted to start by saying that we have a good starting point. If you look across Africa, almost nearly all countries have developed their NDCs, very ambitious NDCs. Some have actually revised and actually increased the ambition. But we know, of course, that the priority still remains very much so on adaptation and resilience. And this is something that I always say that we can do as much as we can, and we should do as Africans in terms of contributing to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But even if we are to go to net zero tomorrow, that will still be negligible in the bigger scheme of things, though still important. So I just wanted to make that point that our starting conditions are already very good. But there are 3 things which I see as priorities, and I want to build upon them. First is the whole issue of just energy transition has been on the agenda for not just African governments, but I think civil society. And I think one positive to that is that even as we talk about just energy transition, a very important component of just energy transition would be technologies that allows for that to happen. And we do have examples of countries or sectors where we've seen very great progress. If you talk about, for example, geothermal, we've seen a country like Kenya really investing in the last 10 to 15 years massively in geothermal exploration. That would not have happened without technology. So technology becomes a very important part, of that narrative. And actually, currently in Djibouti, we just been in a conference on climate where the president himself has highlighted, how much investment they're making in wind power and solar power. But what these technological opportunities present, I think, is try to address the challenge which we also have with creating opportunities and job and wealth creation for younger people in the country. We know, of course, that out of the 2.1 billion population in Africa, about 41% of that are young people below the age of 18. So if you're looking at Africa developing in the next 20 to 30 years, we're talking of really the fact that we need to scale up investment that create opportunities where we can have real jobs that can provide economic empowerment to our younger generation. And part of that energy transition, I'm quite happy to talk about one of the things that we'll be doing at COP as the Stockholm Environment Institute, together with UNEP in the Office for Africa, African Union Commission on the Climate Green Air Pollution, is to launch the first integrated assessment report on pollution and climate change for Africa. And I think out of that report, we've pointed out 5 key areas where we have done analytical work and believe, of course, that with proper investment around 37 measures in each across the 5 areas, we can actually achieve a resilient Africa, meeting the visions of the African Union Agenda 2063 in the long term, and in the short term, looking at meeting the commitments and opportunities that provided with the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the transport sector, residential sector, the energy sector, agriculture sector, and waste management. And I wanted to point out the waste management part is quite critical, because you do know that the COP27 Egyptian presidency has highlighted a signature project, 50 by 2050 Waste Initiative, and that, again, as I said, provides opportunities, for investment in opportunities for recycling, reuse, and even actually conversion of waste to, to productive sector like waste to fertilizer, waste to energy, which we are seeing already some examples happening across the continent. I think there's opportunity to make sure that this is actually scaled up in a big way. The second priority is, of course, the issue of finance. I know my colleagues will talk a lot about it, but finance, particularly, of course, the issue of loss and damage has become very important. Some of the research work that we have done on financial flows actually suggest that, there's quite a heavy imbalance. First of all, there's a shortfall of financing that comes, of course, to Africa for both climate adaptation and mitigation. Secondly, there's a heavy investment in supporting mitigation and less so in terms of adaptation. Thirdly, the instrument for which this financing is provided is sometimes very unfavorable. Most of them comes through loans. Yet we know that for many countries, 28 out of 33 countries have heavily indebted and so on. It makes sense, of course, that for climate finance, we need more in terms of loans and less of loans. And the third thing is actually there's also a huge gap between commitment and disbursement. So whereas sometimes commitments suggest high numbers, but the disbursement is very slow and sometimes doesn't even happen. So that makes it critical, of course, that finance will done. The third priority area is, of course, the issue of the special circumstances. As I said, Africa contributes less than now by 2018 figures 4.8% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, Africa bears the largest amount in terms of the negative impact of climate change. And there's been, of course, a conversation that Africa needs to be recognized under the solutions that is a special circumstances in order additional support. So I would leave it there, Olumide, and of course looking forward to elaborate with otherwise I'm sure my colleagues will also expand on some of the topics and issues that we have. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Philip. Well, I try to make sure that I strain my ear to listen to you very well because I'm sure it's because of where you are speaking from. But I just want to raise the point where you share on the waste management sector, which is one of the biggest, people are using it to drive the circular economy now. And I think it's very important for Africa to start thinking about the narrative they want to talk about so that we start looking at how do we assess all those opportunities for ourselves and for the future generation. So thank you so much for your contribution. And I just want to quickly let our audience to know that you can keep dropping your questions in the, the chat box. I'm sure most of our speakers will also be putting their eye on that to see how they want to, can also reflect that in their conversation. Because we still have two speakers for this conversation, and I'm sure that we are ready. I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. And please, I'm sure you will still be with us before you leave so that you can also hear from the other speakers as well, from what they're going to be sharing with us. So thank you so much. Let us move on because this is very important for us to understand that what we are doing today is to actually understand ourselves very well. The narrative we are talking about, the climate resilient Africa, how is it going to build the future of Africa for us? What are the, a lot of countries have talked about the nationally determined contribution. A lot of countries talking about emission reduction, and when it comes to Africa, we always tell ourselves that we are vulnerable to this or vulnerable to that. But do we know that the potential lies within ourselves? And until we start to, get the understanding of the innovation that we have and understanding of the potential that we have, then that is where we start looking at how to assess any other funding or any other finance that is there. And we are ready, as our topic, as the catalyst idea says, to amplify, to accelerate, and to put things in action, which is something that we need to start looking at. So I just wanted to go straight to, this is a powerful speaking opportunity now. I just wanted to sit back and listen to this wonderful person. To me personally, and I don't know how it is to you all on this call, and I just want you two guys to understand that one of the powerful speaker, one of the powerful contributors, one of the powerful message that we want to listen to now is the narrative, the change in narrative that we're talking about. As Dr. Philip has also given us the background of what we need to be looking at. So I want to call on Dr. Richard Munang. He's the Deputy Regional Director for United Nations Environment Program. Is nobody to, I don't know how I need to introduce him again. If you have been hearing about innovative volunteerism, and that is one of the key narrative now that is even, interlink the 5 big narrative that Catalyst 230 has already shared with us today, innovative volunteerism. And Dr. Richard, was the climate change coordinator of the same office where he guided implementation of UNEP's climate resilience development strategy at the national and regional level. So if you are looking for somebody to speak on this topic today, I think this is the right person as well to speak on this topic. He managed the first UNEP adaptation project called Climate Change Adaptation and the Development Program, CCDA, and implemented jointly with UNDP. He works with the, the biggest, let me say, the network in Africa called EBAFOSA, which is the EBA for mountains, EBA for food security, EBA for coastal ecosystem, low emission development, and climate action project. So guys, let me just conclude by saying that in 2016, Dr. Richard was also the winner of UNEP's Baobab Staff Award for Programs Innovation, for efficiency, and with the UNEP work in urban policy integration being upscaled nationally and and regionally. Dr. Richard is a Cameroonian environmental change and policy from the University of Nottingham, and they complete his first plenary executive certificate in climate change and energy policy making for the long term and at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. I have the pleasure and pleased to welcome Dr. Richard Munang to also give us its own narrative that is going to usher on as we move on to COP27 and to speak forward for Africa. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. You have the floor in a couple of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olumide, and thanks for the generous introduction. I was looking at what are you saying? Yeah, and thanks for being a wonderful mentee to the organizers of this event. Thank you very much for this timely discussion, because I think this is quite very, very important and puts together opportunities for the continent to leverage. And I use the word leverage intentionally to make their case. And that is why the topic of contextualizing priorities and responses are quite very, very important. But let me put this within an African proverb context, which says that all heads are the same, but not all thoughts are the same. And I think that is really the underlying premise of how we need to contextualize Africa's reality here today. Because when you look at this African proverb, is what it's telling us is that Africa's approach to COP27 cannot be the same like every other region in the entire world. Yes, we know that climate change is a universal risk. Yes, we do know that, but we know its impacts. But the optimal response have to vary from region to region based on the peculiarity of that region. We're 12 days to the change, to COP27 as we speak today. And what we need is to understand that, yes, this is called an African COP, both rightfully and instinctively so. And I want you to underline the word rightfully and instinctively, because it is called an African COP because it's happening on African soil. That's fine. But it's supposed to be looked as an implementation COP, and that's rightfully so. And why I say so is that when you look at the continent today, our mothers, our brothers and sisters in all the corners of the continent are sacrificing either to buy maize meal for their kids and forgo drinking water and forgo access to electricity, whereas they need both. And this predicament reflects the dispensation of emergency that the entire globe is under, which has worsened and made a bad situation even worse. So as we head to COP27, these red alerts are happening. Floods, we saw the other day in Nigeria, Kogi State and others. We're seeing droughts in East Africa. And why I'm putting this context is because I want us to understand that there are two steps in which we need to then look. COP27 is here. What should Africa priorities be? And how can we then move there using leverage, not the blame game, and not the sorry language that sometimes put us in a position of weakness rather than from a position of strength. And when you look at the reality of it, it is that the damage and risk we are facing as a continent going to COP27 will continue after COP27. That's point number one. Point number two is that Africa stands out as a continent that have shown global leadership. We cannot underestimate that. And that is something that I never ever hear being articulated from a position of strength. Africa stands out for its global leadership in climate action. As we're speaking today, over 70% of African countries have achieved climate targets as set at under Goal 13 of the SDGs. No country in North America or in Europe have done so. We have these statistics, but this is not being championed. As we speak today, a record 98% ratification rate with the first NDCs. Africa ratified it more than any other continent in the world. We don't talk about it. That's missing an opportunity. And at the same time, when we talk about the updated NDCs, what we have today is that 45 African countries have submitted their NDCs, their revised NDCs, and a highlight of the region's climate action commitment as revealed in these submissions, showcasing practically that a continent that have emitted only between 3 to 4% in their NDCs revised have 83% of those NDCs including emissions reduction targets. That is powerful. So that's our strength and that's our leverage. So now the next question then, so which way should Africa go as they head to COP27? What I think needs to be done based on this realistic context, emotionally driven, but on facts, is that the continent needs to drive NDC's implementation in a way that unlocks socio-economic opportunities, because COP27 after 14 days will come and go. The challenges of drought and floods will not go away. Our mothers, our brothers and sisters are suffering as we speak today. That's not going to end after 14 days of discussions and negotiations. And so the first thing the region needs to do in prioritizing reality and at the same time going to COP to negotiate positions that can be able to respond, the first thing is that the region needs to distance itself from what I call a facilitator of carbon tax, which the discussion is already coming up. Why do I say this? Africa hosts 17% of the entire global population, yet it's minuscule emissions of just about 3 to 4%. But at the same time, it's also a net positive carbon absorber. The Congo forest has been attacked as carbon sponges, but the continent is estimated to actually be importing over 40% of the global used cars. What does that mean? It means that the continent actually is importing cars which fall below the emission standards. And sometimes this is used against the continent. And if the continent is not careful, its positive net carbon opportunity that needs to be used as a leverage will then end up sometimes argued around this facilitator of carbon. So what do we need to do? Africa's current gap in motorization as we speak today is one in which we cannot underestimate. The continent accounts for an estimated only 1% of cars sold worldwide, but the world is moving towards electric vehicles, e-mobility, and Africa can specialize as a hub for manufacturing these e-vehicles and infrastructure. We're talking all the minerals that are needed to do this are in this continent. So at COP26, what should the region do? Under that point number one is that at COP26, the region should prioritize partnerships in implementing key provisions like Article 6.2 and towards greening transport, agriculture, and other sectors. That takes me to the second point, which is very, very important. And this second point is that we must diverse from mortgaging implementation actions as our brothers and sisters die as a result of lack of resilience. Africa is a house on fire. That's how I call it. And if your house is on fire, in as much as you're not the one who set that fire, you have to quench it. You have to put it out. Even as you look for those who caused it and how they can be able to compensate, you have to put that fire out. And so it is estimated that on average, the implementation of up to 70% of Africa's NDCs are conditional. If they're conditional, it means that they're dependent on external support. And if they're dependent on external support, even in some countries, up to 98.95% of their commitments are conditional. This, however, is not realistic because it then means that if we don't get external finance, if the continent doesn't get external finance, then it's not able to build resilience. And that's, of course, the continent needs resources. Of course, the continent needs support. But like I said, Africa is a house on fire, and underline that. What we know is that 10 years, 100 billion in international finance, out of that, Africa has only received about 20 billion, which represents about 0.6% of the region's needs that are needed between now and 2030. And this is grossly inadequate. So learning from this, the message is simple. The continent cannot only bet on international financing alone, expecting that this is going to come, whereas the citizens are actually suffering because of lack of resilient opportunities. And therefore, what needs to happen? The continent needs to start leveraging what alternative approaches and innovative approaches, blended finance approaches. Because as we speak today, the continent contributes 20% of its adaptation needs from the national budget. That's a plus and that's leverage. And what needs to be done is that this needs to be used in such a way that at least it can actually be able to create investment opportunities, use blended finance, working with private and public sector, developing de-risking instruments so that at least microfinancing institutions, local cooperatives can actually be engaged. So what should Africa do? Another point two, Africa's choices at COP27, as far as financial support is concerned, should leverage this logic of de-risking tools to present a low-risk investment platform for international finance and attract investors beyond public. You can only win from a position of strength. And that takes me to the third point, which is almost second to the last. Africa being a leader in climate policy, which is applauded, also need to take a lead on transparency. What do I mean by this? We have 72% of countries that have not translated their NDCs into investment plans. That's a missed opportunity. If they don't translate the NDC into investment plans, then they're not going to attract investors. And then we will be missing huge opportunities as a continent. But at the same time, we're talking about a global stock take that is going to happen, and Africa actually lacks accountability tools like the national communications, like the biannual annual reports, like the long-term low emissions development plans. As we speak today, a total of 6 cycles of the national communications. There are only 8 countries that have submitted at least one national communication. That's a fallacy. As we speak today on the long-term low emissions development strategies, only 4 African countries have submitted that. So what does this mean? With this stock take coming, Africa should leverage the increased scrutiny to foster partnerships during COP that will enhance its transparency compliance. And the last aspect is very, very important. Adaptation is a priority for the continent. That's true. And there is also loss and damage. But the question that I want to pose, and I also want to debunk a false narrative here, this is my personal view, which is, so the most vulnerable region, yes, we know, is Africa, hosting COP27, yes, and the COP has highlighted its prioritization of climate adaptation and loss and damage. Fine, perfect. All these are core areas in enabling the region to adapt and recoup the past climate losses. And there is a moral obligation here. Africa, rightly so, needs to adapt and need to be able to address the issue of loss and damage. Because there's a report that was released in June, which shows that 55 economies that are hard hit in the entire world, 22 of them, which are African countries, reveal that all these countries hard hit by climate change have lost up to about 525 billion losses inflicted by shifts in temperature and rainfall in the past 20 years. And these countries could have been more richer today. So what's the point? The point is, despite the fact that this is a key issue and it is already happening, the continent needs to prioritize, as they argue from a negotiation perspective, back home, they need to prioritize what I call a smarter approach. Instead of projecting liability alone, and I use the word alone and underline because I know I'll be asked, oh, why are you saying that? No. Instead of projecting liability alone of these losses, the region needs to project the enterprise opportunities that come with addressing these losses. For example, from green infrastructure to network-based solutions, to food production, to clean energy, right? We must be able to leverage this opportunity. We're talking at a time when the continent actually have over 84% of its population depending on clean cooking. But at the same time, we know that if we're able to turn agricultural waste to biogas, to fuel briquettes, we'll be reaching and decentralizing clean energy solutions to communities. We'll be reversing the causes of indoor pollution that causes over 700,000 Africans each and every year. But we're not doing this. I'm not even projecting this kind of narrative. So that's the point. And so at COP27, what the region needs to do is to prioritize collaborations geared towards unlocking these opportunities with much more vigor and avoid contentions alone around the traditional approach of these issues of loss and damage and adaptation. And then focus on aspects that can create entrepreneurial opportunity. And lastly, this is the last point. Africa is an informal setting region. The informality of the continent can never be ignored. And therefore, every action and discussion should have in mind that over 80% of the entire continent is in the informal sector, and they create 80% of the jobs. And if we are to leverage any opportunity, these people must be in our mind, and the solutions to them cannot just be parachuted. They need to be leveraged and contextualized within the context in which we live. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Wow, wow, wow. This is powerful. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. I don't want to repeat all what you've said, but I just want to say that a lot of people will be able to understand that the narrative you are putting to us is showing that Africa, we have the potential. Everything we are looking for lies within our system. It's just for us to go out there and tap into the opportunity. Then secondly, you've mentioned a lot about the low-term, long-term emission. You've talked about, from the countries you said they've submitted, I think Africa need to do more. Need to do more in this, and it's a call to action, a call to everybody on this call to start looking at what are the ideas that we, not only the young people, let me say as a country, we need to start looking at in pushing the agenda of this narrative we just hear now. And the area of investment opportunity that lies within Africa that we need to tap into is also very, very clear, because for Africa to get to where we are now, it takes dedicated people that have been talking, that have been creating innovations on ground, that have been changing narrative of business opportunities across the, continent. And I think it's very, very important as we are moving to COP27, we should start to understand those, things that we need to seek or ask for, not just something that we ask for now. And within 14 days, like you said, within 14 days, after 14 days, what next? I think it's a very big question to everybody, or very big question to African continent, to ask ourselves. We say African COP. After 14 days, your calculation was very, 14 days, what do we need? Do we just go there and talk about adaptation and loss and damage and we go back home? Or do we go there and speak to the potential that lies within us, to now start thinking about how do we, put that in a value that can help us to drive innovation within? And also, I think also that from your contribution, you've been able to open our eyes to things that we need to start seeking for as an African continent. Those 5 items you did.
After you.
So, okay, sorry, I think that person is. So you've already given us those, key actions that we need to be looking forward to. And I'm calling to all of us, as many of us that are going to COP, in every breakout session, in every side event, I think we need to start talking about those important things Dr. Richard have shared with us today, so that we don't go and ask for things that will only last within 14 days. But things that will guide the future of Africa, and we'll be able to bring back home and we'll be able to use it for our own future. Who is on the back end for us? Let me go. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Richard. And I'm very sure that you will still be on this call to also, respond to some key important messages we're going to be having in our chat box. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard. And I wish you a very fruitful week ahead. So now I want to bring on, I call her doctor now because, for you to be among 2 doctors, then that spirit you need to flow within you. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to be bringing a friend, Dr. Karishma. I think I met her also at African Climate Week, and she's a PhD candidate in climate finance. So we've been talking about, Dr. Philip mentioned waste management, and there's no way you talk about waste sector, you not talk about financing those sector. Dr. Richard have given us a narrative that not only money, because you always tell us that money will never be enough. And one thing I think for us now is for us to now start looking at what can that money do, and it will be maximized for us. So she's a PhD candidate in climate finance from the IESEG School of Management in France, with a particular focus on carbon markets around the world, and all the masters in carbon finance. Oh my God, from the University of Edinburgh. So my friend, has been the research fellow for the NDC Financing in Africa country with Frankfurt School of Finance and Management and the African Research Impact Network. So guys, I think we're going to be hearing a lot of mechanism, a lot of financial gaps, financial opportunities, from Karishma this afternoon. And I can't wait to hear how we can not only be asking for money, but asking for money for things that are, important, things that will make Africa to be one of the, not only the vulnerable continent again, but we put us in a shape that we don't only ask for money, but we ask for value. Thank you very much. Karishma, you have the floor. 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Olamide. Hopefully I'll be a doctor by next year, but not for now. Thank you, Catalyst 2030, for bringing us on board. And from what I could see is that your 3rd pillar, which was very specific on funding for youth and gender, and this is one of the topics that I'm very much engaged on the advocacy part, and I'll probably start with that. I see that we are more than 50 on this call, And I'm also happy to announce that I will be the spokesperson at COP27 for youth on climate finance. So I would like to invite you to share your views in the meantime with me, because this is a good opportunity for me to gather your views on climate finance and youth. I'm gonna share a Woo clap in the chat. Please let me know if it works for you. So it's a link where, as I'm intervening, if you want to share about different aspects or different thoughts, just to keep you engaged. It's also a late evening or late afternoon. So yeah, so we'll start with that. From my perspective, and especially from the past research that we've published during a World Bank event in May 2022. So this year we published a report with Yongo, and this report was talking mainly about the needs of climate finance for youth. So as I mentioned, this is clearly something that I'm really looking into on the advocacy side. So based on this, Africa, as you know, is a continent, the youngest continent, and we have to leverage and catalyze on the youth population that is out there. And that's why it's very important to understand like the youth needs for climate finance. And from this report, which I'll be sharing also in the chat, you could see that there are different barriers, but also opportunities that we have identified. For example, we just go to the basic. Whenever I go to a conference, you have a lot of youth, or even like in my private chat, I have a lot of youth, youth leaders, and those are part of organizations or entrepreneurs who message me to say like, hey, I have an idea, where can I get the funding, you know? So basic things like this. We know that there is a huge gap into centralizing all this information. And also when we talk about the youth, about the notion of climate finance, we see that the youth themselves do not know how to unlock those climate finance, because the perception that they have on climate finance is just the finance being driven from countries like from the UN or World Bank, and not much into the private sector finance that is being channeled towards climate actions. So this is one of the key gaps that we have identified. And secondly, it's the also the standardization of the process is very critical. We've seen that the access to climate finance is hindered because the application forms are very different in nature, and also it takes a lot of time where the youth do not have capacity or the knowledge to fill in those application forms. So they truly need capacity building in those aspects to be able to unlock those financing and to be able to access them. And so these are, I'm sharing the report in the chat, whereby you can have a look. It will take 1 or 2 minutes to load, maybe because it's on the Yongo website, but you can have a look at the first report where we analyze the needs of climate finance for youth. And as you can see that most of the respondents were from Africa region, which is very good, because we wanted to target the most vulnerable regions that needs the climate finance, and we were able to interview a lot of youth from the region. Secondly, when we talk about this process, so beyond COP27 for the youth, what we are going to do so that most of you that are also would like to take part in our initiatives, you can join us. So beyond COP27, we have another research with RCC Kampala based in Uganda and Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. We are going to assess all the application forms, application process of climate finance for the youth. And we are going to talk to policymakers on how to standardize them and where are the gaps into clearly accessing those climate finance. So this research is being held with these two organizations, and of course with Yongo, where I'll be part of the team. And we are also going to amplify the research access and also the capacity building of the youth. So we started this year with Climate Finance Academy, where 100 youth took part in it, but to clearly further reduce those barriers, because there was the barrier of language. The academy was held only in English, and then it was held at a specific time where it was like 5 a.m. in Palau, or like 2 a.m. in other countries. So it was really not accessible to everyone. We are in touch with UNITA or UNCC Learn to further develop course content to be able to reach out to several youth and empower them and give them those tools that they need to be able to unlock climate finance. The first steps that we will be doing towards COP is that we would be having a COP classroom, which is going to be held on the 15th of November at 10 a.m. Central European time. So it has very limited seat, but it will provide a snapshot of climate finance, basically from the private sector lens, because from the public sector lens, there is the climate investment funds under the banner of World Bank already working on this part. So I highly encourage you to also have a look at UNCC Learn COP classroom, which I'm typing in the chat. Well, this is more about what we are doing in terms of youth and funding, because I think that saying that we need more funding without concrete data or without concrete points is not going to bring a change. But when we can be the voice of those youth through our research and reports, that would definitely speak to different stakeholders. And hopefully during COP, we would also be launching a review report on 100 funds, where we analyze what kind of funds are available for youth. So this report would be launched with Yongo and also with Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. So yeah, so all these are being done in relation to youth, but also as Olumide mentioned, I'm also involved in different capacity where with the NDC financing fellow with Frankfurt School. So one of the research that I've been doing is in terms of data availability and data requirements to access the NDC financing, because as Dr. Richard mentioned clearly that we have a heavy reliance on external climate finance and the conditionality of climate finance, and also, but we in this research, we are looking at what are the data requirements that needs to be there to mobilize the NDC financing needed for African countries, and the key gaps that we have identified, or the opportunities that we have identified, lies into the type of data being used. You know, like quantitative data, we can see that in the project proposals or even in the application forms from GCF or GEF is not that much when it looks at requirements. Like when you can see that most of them are using just CO2 emissions to quantify the impact, or when they look at adaptation data, there's not much, it's mostly like qualitative. Even climate risk, they would say, okay, we are facing like high waves or high heat, but without mentioning clearly what is that, what is the impact, or what is the matrix, or what really counts towards the data being provided. But also these kind of data can be a deterrent to private sector. You know, if you show that you're high risk project, then it can also act as a deterrent. So there needs to be a balance, and there needs to be a proper framework to be able to find those data and to be able to unlock those climate finance from a private sector perspective, but also from the public sector perspective. So this is one of the research that would hopefully be published soon, like as a working paper, and we would be able to talk to different stakeholders about how to be able to portray those data requirements so that it's also aligned with mobilizing the NDC financing. And my third point would be that when we talk about Africa Forward for COP27 is about the Article 6. I hope that I'll be on time. So one more minute. Is about Article 6 is that we need to be taking a position very clearly in the negotiation room and in the discussions of Article 6. I've been present in the negotiation room for the last COP27, and I can say that most of the discussions was being led by mostly the developed countries wanting to implement a lot of those frameworks of Article 6. So Africa needs to come together, and we need a strong position when we are talking about Article 6, especially about Article 6.8, where it's about the human rights aspect, and also touching upon the non-market approaches, and knowing that Article 6 for Africa is not just a climate goal, but it goes beyond and is an SDG goal. So these are the 3 points that I would like you to look into if you want to know more about climate finance. So how the youth is engaged into climate finance, or what is out there, which we talk through our report. You can follow Yongo. And the second one is about my own research with Frankfurt School and African Research Arena, which is based in Nairobi. And the third one is Article 6, which is very, very much important. We should not be led by the developed country to be able to unlock or to be able to implement Article 6. Yeah, so I hope that I was within time and we have time for Q&As. But feel free to fill in my book club so that we can, I can take your points forward as a spokesperson. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. I said it before she started that if you want to really get involved and get engaged, Krishna meeting her was one of the biggest, advice based on when people talk about climate finance. And you can see the pool of financing across Africa now. We need to be strategic in tapping into it. And I'm happy that you also shared the reports that you share with us in African Climate Week, which is one of the biggest, achievement for the that constituency, and also making emphasis on the NDC financing and youth network as well. And I can say that, in everything we are talking about, we are just looking forward to how do we move forward? How do we get ourselves, when it comes to adaptation, when it comes to mitigation, and sure, when it comes to loss and damage? I think all these things need financing, but we need to be strategic, like I said, in getting this financing. So thank you very much, Krishna, for this wonderful presentation today. And I'm sure that a lot of us on this call have been able to get one or two things from what our speakers have mentioned. But quick one, let me quickly go to the audience. I don't know if somebody checking that. I just want us to have 2 to 3 questions from our audience to speak. If you know you have a question, please just identify by raising up your hand. Then I will call you to ask. And please make your question not more than 30 seconds, if possible, so that we don't waste much time. The first person I see is Yame Nkogwe. I need 2 people to ask question 2. Yame, I'm coming back to you. Then the next person, I've not seen anybody. The next person, okay, I've seen the second person, McDonald. I'm giving you guys, please, in 30 seconds. And your question, the person you are directing it to, please just mention the person, whether it's Dr. Richard, Dr. Phillips, just mention them. Then you go straight to the point. Thank you very much. Yame, you have the floor.
Yes, I wasn't there for Dr. Phillips, but when I was listening to Dr. Richard, I think I was at the National Adaptation Week that was sponsored by the expert group of the least developed countries that was held here in Gaborone in Botswana. And one thing that was very clear was that national adaptation plans should really be decoupled from NDCs because it doesn't reflect the challenges in Africa. So I think this touches on Article 2.1c. So I just wanted to get your perspectives on how pertinent is it for national adaptation planning to be decoupled from this idea of NDCs, because without that, you cannot even start to talk about the finance. Then I just wanted a quick one to, Arishna? This is how do you get in touch with Yongo to do this public-private dialogue for countries that haven't even started the process? For example, here in Botswana, we have not even started a conversation on climate finance and even readiness or anything like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yame. Thank you. I'm sure our speakers are still here. So please, if you can respond to his question, please. Yame, your question is direct to Dr. Richard or Krishna.
Yeah, there were the 2. The one was the issue that how pertinent is it to decouple national adaptation planning from NDCs? Because if you do not have adaptation planning standing alone separate from NDCs, because currently they're in this article 2.1c. They actually speak to the same. But the issue is when you talk to NDCs, this seems almost like a northern issue because that's talking to mitigation, whereas adaptation is a global south phenomenon. We're bearing the brunt of this. We're not even contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, but there's no financing for adaptation. It's actually now starting up. So, I mean, how pertinent would it be going to COP that national adaptation planning is decoupled from these nationally determined contributions? Then there was the second point to Karishna. How do you get in touch with UNGO so that, for example, you host a public-private partnership dialogue forum in a country that hasn't even started a conversation around climate finance and investment? Case in point, Botswana. We have not even started. Yeah.
Okay, I think Krishna, you have the floor, right? Okay, Krishna, you can also give her advice on how to join that network to have more information. I think that would be better. So yeah, man, I think some of your question is direct to Krishna. I think you can reach out to Krishna on how to, get involved and to also understand the dynamics of what you just said. I don't know whether if Dr. Richard is on this call. Dr. Richard,
I'm here.
Yes, please, you can also give him a narrative of, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Olumide. I mean, and thanks for the question that has come through. So I'll answer this question in three parts very quickly. Firstly, there is an issue of a narrative here, and this is actually the biggest weapon against the continent. We foster wrong narratives and we embrace wrong narratives. What is adaptation in the first place? It's about resilience, right? Putting in place structures and systems so that people can be able to cope with already the changing climate. And the national adaptation, there are plans to operationalize what? To build resilience. When you look at African NDCs, they were formulated to do what? The intent of the formulation of African NDCs is not the same like with Europe or with North America. The first and foremost were formulated to drive national development in a way that lower emissions. Go and read, and over 70% of all the NDCs in the entire African continent, which I've read, focuses on what? Have clean energy and sustainable agriculture and waste. You cannot develop, and all these are anchored within the national development visions of all these countries, if you read very carefully. And therefore, to detach national adaptation planning from your own NDCs, which is contributing to your own development plan, is a misnomer, and it's a wrong narrative. And therefore, what's the answer? The answer is actually the opposite. National adaptation plans must be used to turbocharge and drive the pathway for the implementation of the NDCs in agriculture, in waste, in clean energy. The second aspect is you cannot think adaptation as a standalone, and that's the wrong narrative for the continent. I would just embrace it. Look, we must leverage mitigation to power adaptation. My mother in the village grow tomatoes and grow vegetables using organic manure from droppings of chickens and cattle. And then what happens? She gets bumper harvest, and then the vegetable spoils and the tomatoes spoil. Why? Because she doesn't have a solar dryer to dry those vegetables. She doesn't have a cold storage system. These are mitigation actions. So what is wrong with leveraging mitigation actions to be able to power adaptive capacity of communities? And that's a narrative I've been pushing, and nobody listening to it because we're very good in embracing false narrative. The last part with this, Africa will not be able to build transformational development without premising adaptation as a socio-economic investment and as a socio-economic opportunity. And for that to happen, we must leverage mitigation actions to drive that process. If not, we will come back here again after 1 year and discuss the same. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Richard, for that key point. I think we still have, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, good. Do we have any? Okay, we have Aruna. I think the last person, this other person that's supposed to ask the question left. So Aruna, you have the floor.
You've taken the floor away from me.
Yes, you have the floor now.
So thank you very much. I will go just direct, and thank you for the for Richard and all the presentators. I think that you present good topics. So I have just one question for Richard. It's concerning the SDG. So I work on this process when developing the economic and development framework in Niger. It's like it's very difficult for our countries to respond clearly and effectively to these SDGs. Is it possible for Africa to design their own or to work with those people that develop the SDGs in order to have something that can match with the possibility and the capacities of our governments? You know that if they did not respond clearly to that, they will not be aware, how we call it, they will not have access to some funding program because they will say that you did not fulfill the requirements for these SDGs so that you would not have this and that. So I think that all the countries have their own development and economic framework. Is it possible for us to work with, I don't know, the government of Africa to design something clear, and then when you reach to the COP27, then make balance and how we call it, adjust those SDGs? For me, is above the capacity of our countries. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for that question. And I think it's a very important question, not just because you've asked it, because that is the kind of thinking that somehow has engulfed the continent and many more. Rightly so, but I think we need to be creative and at the same time innovative and ideal, and that's why I really like this discussion here today. Firstly, the SDGs to me are a tool to help countries develop and move beyond where they are today, leaving no one behind. Let me take an example. You can achieve actually all the SDGs by implementing not even up to 4 of them. Let's take energy, which is goal 7. If you are able to have access and affordable energy to our mothers and brothers in communities, I started by 84% of Africans are energy impoverished, especially they depend on clean cooking. If you are able to decentralize clean cooking solutions, you will be addressing the issue of health, where 700,000 Africans die every year because of indoor pollution. You will be engaging you to turn waste to briquettes, which are cheaper than charcoal, more effective, turn waste to biogas, which will create jobs. That is SDG 8, which will then put money in their pockets and food on the table. You'll be addressing SDG 1 and SDG 2, and you'll be addressing SDG 13. If you are able to leverage accessible structures, because I'm saying it's an issue of narrative that actually makes Africa not to advance their climate action and development. And so this is free knowledge I'm giving here. So if you are able to focus on agriculture and add value, you'll be addressing goal 2, you'll be creating jobs. If you are to ensure that infrastructure that you are developing, a simple road linking a farm to market, you'll be creating and decentralizing clean energy to areas where value can be added. You'll be addressing goal 9 on infrastructure and industrialization. At the same time, driving sustainable consumption and production because you are decentralizing clean energy to add value to reduce post-harvest losses. And if you can engage cooperatives and engage young people in groups, you'll be fostering partnerships, and that way you will drive development, drive climate action, and move forward. It therefore means that what I said earlier, context is important. When concepts are formulated, they need to be contextualized, and it is the people in their own right within their own communities to do so. So our role, wherever we are, is to demystify and decongest these concepts and inspire those who can be able to do it in a way that put money on the table, and that can only be through the enterprising lens. And so my message and answer to you is very simple. The SDGs are tools to drive countries' transformational development and implement climate action in ways that lift people out of poverty, create jobs for our youth, and leverage non-traditional institutions and traditional institutions that are accessible to people without always thinking big, but thinking small, starting small, leveraging what is accessible, but leveraging global concepts and narratives to fit context and lift people up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Richard, for that great contribution. I'm very sure that most of us, we have been able to understand what Dr. Richard has shared with us. You know, the narrative of what we are looking at for Africa is very important because, like I said, we cannot continue to wait for people to solve our problem for us. And until we change that narrative, then that is where we say the Africa we want. So thank you very much, Dr. Richard, and I'm very happy that you've been able to explain that aspect so that we'll be able to understand what we need to demand and be looking forward to, according to, ahead of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. I also want to say that special thanks to everybody on this call. Special thanks to Dr. Phillips, thanks to Dr. Richard, thanks to Dr. Krishna, even though he's going to be doctor next year. Thanks so much for sharing this moment with us. And I know that as we move forward, I will continue this conversation via social media, via different inputs, to be able to understand the narrative we want to push forward to make Africa, a better a place for us to live and to also have leverage on our own, resources that can change the narrative of what we're talking about. Thank you so much. And I want to say a special thanks to Catalyst 2030 for giving me this platform to moderate and to, I'm very honored, to be a moderator to my mentor, to my senior colleagues, and to my friend on this day, on this conversation. Thank you so much. And I give the floor to my sister to, finalize the conversation today. And I hope to see you guys, as many of you that will be coming to COP. Let us connect. And like Dr. Richard said, let us be strategic by our acts, what we actually need, not only for the 14 days, but for the better future of the environment. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
I think I'm going to close because Wando is here. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an honor having you all. My name is Maina Brand, coordinating for Africa, as well as one of the leads for Africa Forward. It's an honor to see that Catalyst members were able to engage with this conversation. And I hope you've learned that climate change also affects your social entrepreneurs. Yeah? And if you can be able to leverage on these, you can be able to now come up with innovative, sustainable businesses that are going to thrive and make sure that societies live better. Thank you so much, everyone, to the speakers. A great honor to have you all, Dr. Munang, Dr. Karishma to be, and Dr. Osano, who has just left, is flying to Namibia. I am humbled to have you all as friends, as well as to invite you to this conversation. And I look forward to conversing with you and working together in the near future. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
Thank you, everyone.